Skinwalker Ranch is not a town. It is 512 acres of fenced private high desert in Utah's Uinta Basin, and in 90 years it has had exactly 4 owners. Every time it changes hands, the story gets stranger. Before this list is over, you will hear about a scientist whose visit here reportedly helped trigger a classified government program. A mesa where the drill bits keep breaking against something nobody can identify. A radio signal caught on camera in a frequency band normally used for satellites. And right at the end, $22 million in federal money spent here in total secrecy until a newspaper found out. That story is number 1, and it is the one part of this entire case that almost nobody disputes. This channel exists to separate what is documented from what is only claimed. If that sounds useful, subscribe because we post research like this every week. Today we are counting down 10 things connected to Skinwalker Ranch that are genuinely on the record. Number 10. The wrong legend. Start with the name because almost nobody gets this part right. Skinwalker Ranch is named for the Yi Naldushi, a shape-shifting witch out of Navajo tradition. It is real folklore, and it is treated with real fear inside Navajo communities, for good reason. There is a problem with that. This ranch sits in Ute territory, roughly 400 miles north of the Navajo Nation. Historically, the Navajo and the Ute were not on friendly terms. According to historian Sandra Jones, the two peoples had a genuinely adversarial relationship long before anyone put up a fence out here. So the most talked about haunted property in the country is named after a legend that belongs to a different nation, 400 miles away, with no documented tie to this specific land. The name did not come out of local Ute tradition. It came later, through 1990s media coverage and the 2005 book that made the ranch famous, both of which reached for the most recognizable regional folklore instead of the one that actually applied here. The property has another name, an older one. Records and locals also call it Sherman Ranch, after the family that owned it in the 1990s. That name never caught on the way the other one did, probably because it never carried the same built-in sense of dread. It is a small detail, but it says something about how this whole legend got built. Nobody checked which nation's folklore actually fit the map. They picked the scarier word and kept going. Somewhere underneath the branding is the actual history of this land, and it belongs to a people who never asked to be part of the story. Number 9. The Silent Decades. 60 years is a long time to live anywhere. Kenneth and Edith Myers owned this land from 1934 to 1994. That is 6 decades on the same 512 acres, through 2 world wars worth of change in the outside world, while this particular patch of Utah desert stayed exactly the same family's problem to manage. And according to the sources on this, the Myers reportedly experienced nothing resembling what came later. No lights, no mutilated cattle, no shape-shifting animals at the fence line. Just decades of ordinary ranch work on ordinary Utah high desert run by one family through the Depression, through a war, through the entire post-war boom that changed the rest of the country. There is no book about the Myers years. No television crew asked to camp out on their land. No researcher wired the fence line with cameras. For 60 years, this was simply a working cattle ranch, unremarkable enough that almost nobody wrote anything down about it at all. Here is the thing. The strangeness that made this place famous does not show up in the record until 1994, the year the Myers sold. It escalates further in 1996, the exact year the property was sold again, this time to a man who had just founded an institute for paranormal research. Skeptics point at that timeline like it is the whole case. The family who owned this land the longest reported the least. The stories only start once the land is in the hands of people already looking for them. To be fair, that is not proof of nothing happening. Absence of reports is not the same as absence of events, and the Myers may simply have kept quiet, the way a lot of rural families keep quiet about things they think nobody outside the property line would believe anyway. But 60 quiet years, followed by 20 years of escalating headlines, is the kind of coincidence a skeptic does not need to work hard to notice. 60 years of silence, and then, almost on cue, the story arrives right when someone shows up who is willing to pay for one. Number 8. Bought a ranch, sold a nightmare. In 1994, Terry and Gwen Sherman bought this property. They wanted a working cattle ranch. What they said they got was something else entirely. By their own account, they saw strange lights over the fields. They found cattle mutilated in ways they could not explain. They described encounters with large animals that did not behave like anything native to this stretch of Utah. None of this is independently confirmed. All of it is the Shermans' own testimony, and it is important to be honest about that up front. But here is what is confirmed. The Shermans bought this ranch in 1994. By 1996, roughly 18 months later, they had sold it and moved on. 18 months on a ranch they had presumably planned to keep for the rest of their lives. For a working rancher, walking away from land that fast is not a small decision. It usually means something has gone badly wrong, financially or otherwise. In this case, according to the family, it was fear. Their story became public through a 1996 newspaper report, and that single article is the actual origin point of everything that followed. The book, The Private Research Institute. Eventually, a slice of a Pentagon budget. All of it traces back to one family deciding to talk to a reporter about what they said happened on their land. There is also a detail skeptics do not let go of. The Shermans sold their haunted ranch directly to a wealthy man already known for funding paranormal research. Their story and his money arrived in the same transaction, and almost everything the public later came to believe about this property rests on that one family's word, sold to the one buyer most motivated to believe it. That does not make the Shermans liars. Frightening, hard to explain things happen to people all the time, on ranches and everywhere else, and there is no requirement that every strange experience come with a tidy scientific explanation attached. But it is worth sitting with the order of events here. A family reports something terrifying. They sell fast. The buyer is a millionaire who had, 1 year earlier, founded an institute specifically built to investigate exactly this kind of claim. Whatever actually happened out here, the paper trail is clear on one thing. A family bought a ranch, and 18 months later, they wanted nothing more to do with it. Number 7. The hunt that came up empty. Robert Bigelow was already interested in the paranormal before he ever heard of this ranch. In 1995, he founded the National Institute for Discovery Science, built to fund serious research into UFOs and unexplained phenomena. A year later, in 1996, he bought Skinwalker Ranch for a reported $200,000, convinced by the Sherman stories that this was exactly the kind of property his new institute existed for. What followed was years of sustained, well-funded investigation. This was not a couple of enthusiasts with a camcorder. This was a private research institute backed by a billionaire with the resources to put trained observers and real instrumentation on this property for an extended stretch of time. Researchers set up surveillance equipment. They monitored the property around the clock. They logged reports of strange lights and unexplained animal encounters, the same kinds of things the Shermans had described. This was, by most standards, the best resource shot anyone has ever taken at proving this place is what people claim it is. The work eventually produced a book, Hunt for the Skinwalker, published in 2005 by George Knapp and Colm Kelleher. That book is the reason most people have heard of this place at all, and for a lot of viewers of this kind of content, it is still the first thing that comes up when they search the name. What gets repeated far less often than the rest of the story is this. Colm Kelleher, one of the researchers who actually did the work, later admitted publicly that after years of focused investigation, they obtained very little physical evidence that could count as conclusive proof of anything. Not weak evidence, not ambiguous evidence. Very little evidence, period, according to the man who was there collecting it. The institute disbanded in 2004. Bigelow kept ownership of the ranch until 2016, but the organized scientific effort behind it had already quietly ended, 8 years before the property even changed hands again. Think about what that means. This was not a case that ran out of funding before it could get answers. It ran for years, with money and equipment and trained people behind it, and the people doing the actual work walked away first, before the property even changed hands again. So the book that built this legend, and the institute that spent years and real money trying to prove something was happening here, ended with its own lead researcher conceding that the evidence never really arrived. That is not a small detail. It is, by the account of the person who ran the investigation, the actual result. Number 6. The camera always fails. There is a running joke among people who study this case, except it is not really a joke, because it shows up in the record too consistently to laugh off entirely. Across 3 decades and at least 3 different research efforts, the same complaint keeps surfacing. Whatever is happening here, the equipment aimed at capturing it tends to fail at exactly the wrong moment. Researchers with the National Institute for Discovery Science reported gear malfunctioning at critical points during observation, the kind of failure that always seems to happen right as something worth recording was underway. In some cases, they described equipment that was physically mangled, with wires torn out entirely, not the sort of damage you would expect from a simple power surge or a loose connection. The book that documented their years of work repeatedly describes this same pattern. Cameras and recorders failing right as something was supposedly occurring. Believers read this as the phenomenon actively resisting observation, as if whatever is out here knows when it is being watched and reacts accordingly. Skeptics read the exact same pattern differently. To them, this is simply the ordinary shape of every paranormal claim that has ever failed to produce proof. The evidence is always the thing that just happened to malfunction, seconds before it could be captured. Either interpretation lands on the same practical outcome. 3 decades of investigation, across a private institute, a Pentagon-linked program, and a long-running television series. And one of the only truly consistent findings across all of it is procedural, not paranormal. The gear stops working. That is a strange thing to build a legend on, and also, if you think about it for more than a second, exactly the kind of thing a legend would need in order to survive scrutiny this long. Number 5. 1.6 gigahertz. This one belongs to a different era of the story. Not the Shermans, not Bigelow's Institute, but the current owner, Brandon Fugal, and the television series filmed on his property since 2020. On the show, investigators including engineer Eric Bard and Dr. Travis Taylor report picking up a recurring radio signal sitting right around 1.6 gigahertz that appears to accompany anomalous events. They first flagged it in the very first episode of the series. What makes it interesting on camera, and worth including on this list even with all the caveats attached, is this. 1.6 gigahertz falls in what is known as the L-band, a range of frequencies typically used for satellite-to-ground communication. It is not a random number. On the series, the team frames its presence out here, over a fenced cattle ranch in rural Utah, as something that should not be expected. They say the signal appears to originate from directly above an area on the property nicknamed the Triangle, and that it tends to show up right as other strange activity begins. To be fair to the production, a satellite band signal recorded in the middle of open desert is at least an interesting technical anomaly worth investigating, regardless of what it turns out to be. Stray L-band signals can come from any number of mundane sources, including actual satellites passing overhead, aircraft, or nearby equipment, and nothing publicly available rules those explanations out. It is worth being precise about what this actually is. This is a claim made on a produced television series, using the show's own equipment and the show's own interpretation. It has not been published in any peer-reviewed setting. It has not been independently reproduced by anyone outside the production. That does not mean it is false. It means it currently exists as a documented claim, not a documented fact. A satellite frequency showing up over a cattle ranch on cue according to the people filming it. Whatever it actually is, it has not left the show to be tested anywhere else. If you are finding this interesting, drop a thumbs up and let us know in the comments which of these you think holds up best. The equipment failures, the satellite signal, or the 60 quiet years. We read all of them. We have covered the personal accounts and the private research so far, but we are only halfway through this list, and the next 4 entries are where this stops being a ranch story and starts being a government one. Number 4. The cow that died looking up. Cattle mutilation stories are not new to this part of the American West. They have been part of rural folklore across the region for decades, long before any television crew showed up with cameras, and they usually come with a range of mundane explanations from predators to routine decomposition. What happened on the show is more specific than the old folklore, and it is worth walking through carefully. A young cow on the property died suddenly. Investigators scanned the area afterward and reported small spikes in radiation readings around the carcass, at levels they described as unusual for the location. A veterinarian who examined the animal said it appeared to have died from a very rapid onset of something like pneumonia, consistent with sudden shock or trauma, rather than any illness that would normally build over time. According to the production, Surveillance footage from around the time of death showed a fast-moving, dark, oval-shaped object in the sky just before the animal collapsed. The team now wears personal radiation dosimeters at all times while working the property, a direct response to this pattern of localized spikes recurring around other events. That is not a small operational change. It means the people running this investigation now treat unexplained radiation exposure as enough of a possibility to build into their daily routine on site. It is also worth remembering that cattle deaths and mutilation reports around this region did not start with the show, and did not start with the Shermans either. Ranchers across the rural West have reported similar losses for decades, long before anyone put a camera on this particular property, and most cases, when investigated by wildlife officials, are eventually attributed to predation or ordinary decomposition patterns that can look strange to an untrained eye. This case gets treated differently, mainly because of what was allegedly caught on camera at the moment it happened. None of this has been independently tested outside the show. The radiation readings, the vet's assessment, and the footage all come from the same production, and none of it has been published for outside review or examined by anyone without a stake in the series continuing. But set the interpretation aside for a moment and just sit with the sequence as reported. A healthy young animal, a shape in the sky, and then sudden, unexplained trauma. Whatever caused it, the vet on record was genuinely surprised by what he found. Number 3. Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. Here is the thing that turns this from a ranch story into a government story. According to James Lakatsky, a former official with the Defense Intelligence Agency, a senior government scientist visited this ranch and had an encounter he could not explain. That is not a paranormal blogger's claim. That is the account of a real, named former Pentagon employee published in a 2021 book he co-authored, titled, with no apparent irony, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. According to that account and related reporting, the scientist returned to Washington and briefed 3 sitting United States senators, Harry Reid of Nevada, Ted Stevens of Alaska, and Daniel Inouye of Hawaii. All 3 agreed the subject was worth serious classified funding. Stop and take that in for a second. 3 senators, 3 of the more senior and respected members of their chambers at the time, heard about events on a cattle ranch in the Uinta Basin and decided the United States government should pay to study it in secret. This is where the story stops being about the Shermans or Bigelow or a television crew and starts being about federal budget decisions made behind closed doors, decades removed from a rancher's testimony but still, somehow tracing back to the exact same 512 acres. It is a strange chain to follow when you say it out loud. A rancher reports lights and dead cattle. A millionaire buys the property and spends years failing to prove it. And somewhere in the middle of that, a government scientist walks the same ground, and whatever he experienced is significant enough, according to people who were there, to reach 3 United States senators within the same year. To be precise about the sourcing here, because it matters more on this entry than almost any other on this list. The book and the claim it contains are real and verifiable. Lakatsky is a real former official, and the book exists exactly as described, sitting on shelves and available for anyone to read. What is harder to verify independently is the encounter itself, the specific experience that supposedly convinced the scientist. That part rests on insider accounts, primarily from Lakatsky and from journalist George Knapp, rather than on any document the public can independently examine. But the outcome of that briefing is not in dispute. It led directly to money. Real, federal, classified money aimed at a program that would eventually be traced straight back to this fence line. A single visit by one scientist to one Utah cattle ranch and 3 senators decided it was worth building a secret program around. That is the actual hinge this entire case turns on. Number 2. Harder than tungsten. There is a flat-topped mesa on this property that has become the visual centerpiece of the entire modern investigation, and there is a reason for that. According to the production, ground-penetrating radar scans conducted across several seasons picked up something large, buried deep in the sandstone, structured enough that the team began describing it as a dome-shaped anomaly. Subsequent scans reportedly showed additional voids nearby. This is the kind of finding that, on paper, sounds like exactly what a research team would want. A defined target, a specific location, something solid enough to scan and measure, rather than another blurry light in the distance or another story secondhand from decades ago. So they decided to drill. What followed across seasons 5 through 7 was a genuinely expensive, genuinely committed engineering effort to physically reach whatever was down there. And according to the show, it did not go the way anyone expected. Brand new tungsten carbide drill bits, some of the hardest cutting material available for this kind of work, were repeatedly destroyed. In some instances, this reportedly happened without the temperature spike you would expect from friction against solid rock. The team has also described the drill appearing to slide off whatever it hits, rather than cutting through it, and any signal being tracked from the area reportedly cutting out the moment contact is made. Season after season, the operation has continued, moved, restarted, and continued again, chasing an object that so far has only ever been described, never actually recovered. This needs to be said as plainly as possible, because this is the single biggest risk of exaggeration in this entire case, and it deserves the most caution of anything on this list. No core sample has been publicly produced. No independent laboratory has analyzed whatever is allegedly down there. No published, peer-reviewed data exists confirming a buried structure of any kind. What exists is footage, on-camera claims from the production's own team, and a drilling operation that, by the show's own account, remains unresolved. That does not make it nothing. Genuinely destroyed tungsten drill bits, if the claim holds up, are not an easy thing to fake or misattribute to ordinary geology, and it would take real effort to stage across multiple seasons of footage. But right now, this is a claim in progress, not a discovery. Nobody outside that production has held whatever is down there in their hands. Whatever is under that mesa, it has broken more drill bits than it has produced answers. Number 1. The program that really existed. Picture the fence line first. Chain link, unremarkable, running through sagebrush flats under an enormous open sky. A locked gate. Beyond it, nothing that looks unusual at all. Cattle. A ranch house. A flat mesa in the distance, catching the last light of the afternoon. Wind moving through the brush, and otherwise silence, the kind of silence you only get in a high desert basin with almost nobody around for miles. There is nothing to see here. That is what makes this one different from everything else on this list. This is the only entry on this countdown where the strangest part is not visible at all. Somewhere inside a federal budget you never had access to, this exact property sat as a documented line item. In 2007 and 2008, according to multiple sources including the agency's own later disclosures, the Defense Intelligence Agency funded a program called the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program, commonly shortened to AAWSAP. The contract, worth approximately $22 million, went to Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, a company owned by the same man who had bought this ranch a decade earlier. Fieldwork under that contract was conducted here, on this property. The funding was arranged by 3 sitting United States senators, Harry Reid, Ted Stevens, and Daniel Inouye, following the briefing described in the last entry. For years, none of this was public. The program operated inside classified channels, unknown to the taxpayers funding it, unknown to almost everyone in Washington outside a small circle. It stayed that way until December of 2017, when reporters Helene Cooper, Ralph Blumenthal, and Leslie Kean published the story in the New York Times. The article confirmed the $22 million, named Senator Reid as the figure who pushed for the program's creation, identified Bigelow's company as the contractor, and confirmed the work included investigations at this specific ranch. The Defense Intelligence Agency's own 2019 disclosure, released under a public records request, backs up the same figures. This is the detail that separates this ranch from every other haunted property in America. Skeptics can question the lights, the mutilated cattle, the buried object under the mesa. They cannot question that the government spent $22 million real dollars secretly investigating this fence line and kept it hidden until a newspaper forced it into daylight. Sit with this part before the video ends. Funding a study is not the same as proving what was studied. Pentagon spokespeople who later confirmed the program's existence have never confirmed that anything recovered here constitutes verified evidence of the extraterrestrial or the paranormal. What is confirmed is narrower and in some ways more interesting. A quiet Utah cattle ranch became important enough to serious people inside the United States government that they were willing to spend millions of dollars and years of secrecy finding out why. Nobody has proven what is out there. What is proven is that somebody with real authority and a real budget was absolutely convinced it was worth $22 million to find out. This property has passed through 4 owners, a research institute, a Pentagon program, and a television franchise, and the honest answer is still that nobody knows what is happening on that land. For me, the standout is the Pentagon entry because it needed no exaggeration at all. Let us know which entry surprised you most. If you want more research like this, subscribe because we do this every week.